federal authorities, her empire of influence crumbling in real time. Tiffany Henyard, once a formidable figure in Dalton, Illinois, was now facing the undeniable consequences of her actions. The courtroom, which had once been a stage for her, political theatrics and power plays, had transformed into a theater of her downfall. The emotional breakdown she experienced was far more than just a reaction to the legal pressures. This was the unraveling of her entire career. For years, Henyard had operated with a sense of invincibility, using her charisma and manipulation to keep adversaries at bay. But in that moment, as federal agents blocked her exit, it was clear that her political tactics had no power in the FLEES face of the law. The momentary flash of fear in her eyes, a rare crack in her usual demeanor, spoke volumes. For the first time, Henyard was not in control of the narrative, and her usual bravado was no match for the legal storm closing in on her. The presence of the federal agents, calm yet resolute, further amplified the gravity of the situation. Henyard's usual deflection tactics, framing the case as political persecution, fell flat, as even her most loyal allies had begun to doubt her. In the past, she had brushed off criticism with ease, even turning it into an advantage. Now, her attempts to deflect were being overshadowed by the overwhelming weight of the evidence against her. As the agents calmly escorted her out, the courtroom buzzed with a mix of shock, disbelief, and grim satisfaction. Henyard, who had once stood tall at the helm of Dalton, was now reduced to a figure of desperation. Her fiery outburst and attempts to assert her innocence only deepened the sense that her career was imploding. The media captured every moment, and the public had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. The whispers of corruption, financial mismanagement, and abuse of power that had circulated for months had now been solidified in the courtroom. Henyard's fall from grace was no longer just a political scandal. It was a personal and public reckoning. The former mayor had built her reputation on manipulating the system and bending it to her will. Now, the very system she had exploited was coming back to hold her accountable. As federal investigators closed in on her, the mayor's cries of injustice only served to highlight the depth of her miscalculations. She had underestimated the severity of the situation, believing she could weather the storm through sheer force of will. But, as the agents prepared to escort her from the courthouse, it was clear that Henyard was now a figure of the past. Her political strength shattered, her reputation in tatters, and her career on the brink of total collapse. The next steps for Henyard are uncertain, but it's clear that the road ahead is fraught with legal battles, public backlash, and a deepening investigation. The mayor, who once commanded the attention of Dalton's residents, now finds herself on the receiving end of that same scrutiny. Her defiant stance in the face of federal investigation only adds to the drama, but it's hard to see how she can reclaim her position of power after such a public fall from grace. The truth is out, and the people of Dalton, once her supporters, are left to grapple with the reality of her leadership and her inevitable downfall. Moment of Tiffany Henyard's downfall was no longer a question of if, but when. The once unshakable leader, who had ruled Dalton with an iron fist, was now a woman on the run, stripped of her power and her dignity. The public spectacle that unfolded outside the courthouse became a living nightmare for Henyard, as she was, pursued relentlessly by reporters and hounded by cameras that documented every painful step of her decline. It was the final chapter of her political career, and it was playing out in real time for the world to see. The media, now fully focused on her unraveling, painted a picture of a leader undone by her own corruption, manipulation, and arrogance. The hashtags were trending, the memes circulating, and every news outlet seemed to have a new angle on her disgrace. The world had watched as Henyard had once crafted her image as an untouchable force in Dalton's political landscape, only to see it shattered under the weight of her own hubris. Her legal team, scrambling to salvage her reputation, issued statement after statement, claiming political persecution, calling the investigation a vendetta, a smear campaign by those who wanted to see her fall. Yet, despite their best efforts, the tide of public opinion had shifted irrevocably. Henyard's supporters, once unwavering, now questioned her leadership. Those who had once rallied behind her now stood in silence, unsure of how to defend her, when the truth was so glaringly exposed. Even the whispers of her closest allies turned to murmurs of doubt and fear. In the background, the federal investigation intensified. What had begun as a series of allegations was now a full-scale probe, with new revelations surfacing daily. Henyard's manipulation of funds, abuse of power, and the toxic culture of fear she had created in Dalton's political system were becoming impossible to ignore. The whispers of offshore accounts, questionable financial dealings, and intimidation tactics were only the tip of the iceberg. As investigators peeled back the layers, they uncovered a network of corruption and deceit that extended far beyond Henyard's personal actions. The web of influence she had built over years was unraveling, revealing a political machine driven by fear and manipulation. Within minutes, Henyard's downfall became the focal point of every news cycle. News outlets broke stories, investigative journalists uncovered new details, and social media exploded with speculation, outrage, and disbelief. The momentum of the investigation was unstoppable. Henyard's face, once synonymous with power and control, now graced every front page with the words "Fall from Grace" plastered beside it. The powerful mayor who had once cast a shadow over Dalton now found herself trapped in it, the walls closing in. Henyard's defiant remarks had only deepened the sense of her vulnerability. Her belief that she could talk her way out of any situation, twisting facts, playing the victim, and spinning the narrative, had finally failed her. The agents who flanked her in the hallway were a stark reminder that her reign was over. The calm, unwavering presence of federal authorities contrasted sharply with Henyard's frantic, desperate demeanor. Her attempts to control the narrative had fallen apart, and the situation had escalated far beyond her ability to manage. As her team scrambled to shield her from the media storm, the reality became clear. Henyard's political career had imploded, and there would be no quick fix. The damage to her reputation was irreparable, and her once powerful grip on Dalton's political landscape had shattered beyond repair. Even her loyal allies were now backing away, wary of being associated with her tarnished name. The whispers of doubt had turned to shouts, and Henyard could no longer count on her supporters to stand by her side. The television networks that had once applauded her leadership now found themselves compelled to reassess their support. A primetime anchor, who had once lauded Henyard as a groundbreaking leader, now summed up the reality. This is not just about one woman's fall from grace. It's about a system that allowed it to happen and the consequences of unchecked power. The sentiment echoed across the media landscape, painting Henyard not as a victim of a political conspiracy, but as a leader who had become a symbol of corruption, abuse, and the collapse of an empire built on lies. As Henyard was escorted into the federal building, the weight of her downfall became undeniable. Her face, once a symbol of defiance and control, now betrayed her vulnerability. The cameras, the reporters, the flashing lights, they all followed her, documenting the complete disintegration of her political career. Her silent refusal to engage with the media did little to stop the flood of questions. Is it true the FBI has a case against you? Will you step down? The questions kept coming, each one a reminder of how far she had fallen. Inside the federal building, Henyard's fate remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Her political machine was no longer in control. The public had turned on her, and the federal investigation was just beginning. The world was watching as the final chapter of her career unfolded, and the former mayor, once untouchable, now stood vulnerable, a figure of scandal and disgrace. The walls were closing in on Tiffany Henyard, and this time there was no escape. Once a formidable and commanding figure, she now found herself backed into a corner, facing the consequences of her own actions. The weight of corruption allegations, intimidation tactics, and the growing public outcry against her leadership left her with little room to maneuver. Her carefully constructed image as an untouchable political force was rapidly disintegrating, and the political career she had fought so hard to build was now hanging by a thread. Inside a cold interrogation room, Tiffany sat across from a group of federal investigators attempting to maintain the facade of her usual confident persona. But the cracks were beginning to show. Her once unshakable demeanor faltered as she realized the gravity of the situation she was in. The evidence against her was overwhelming. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed, forcing a hollow laugh as she leaned back in her chair. "You have nothing on me." The lead investigator, unfazed, calmly placed a thick folder on the table, the damning evidence staring back at her. Bank statements, wire transfers, and communications painted a troubling picture of a politician who had exploited her position for personal gain. The investigator flipped through the pages, sliding one toward her. It showed a sizable deposit from an unidentified shell company linked to a government contract. Henyard's smile faltered. Another page contained an email exchange detailing how she had provided favors for donors in exchange for political support. But it was the last piece of evidence that hit her like a punch to the gut. A signed document bearing her name, approving a deal flagged as highly suspicious. The investigator leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "You can continue pretending, or you can start talking right now. We have enough to take this all the way." For the first time in a long while, Henyard had no comeback. The world was already moving on without her. The room fell into an eerie silence as the weight of her situation pressed down on her. Reporters prepared for their evening broadcasts. Social media buzzed with speculation about who would replace her, and the city's residents anxiously awaited the next chapter in this unfolding scandal. Tiffany, once known for her defiance, now sat stiffly in her chair, her arms crossed, her polished nails tapping against the cold metal table. She had spent years talking her way out of sticky situations, but this time was different. She wasn't facing a tough political rival or a smear campaign. This time, she was facing real consequences. The lead investigator shook his head before speaking again. "You know, Miss Henyard, we've dealt with politicians like you before. They all think they're untouchable, until they're not." As he flipped through the thick file, each page revealed more incriminating details: deposits into offshore accounts, invoices for community projects that never existed, and emails outlining backdoor deals. Henyard forced a smirk, but it didn't reach her eyes. The investigator raised an eyebrow and slid another document across the table. It was a sworn statement from a former aide who had attended key meetings and decided to speak out. Henyard's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she felt the flicker of panic. It wasn't just annoyance or anger anymore. It was fear. She glanced at the door, almost hoping her lawyers would burst in and save her. But they weren't there. She was alone. The walls were closing in. The fallout from Henyard's interrogation began almost immediately. News of the federal investigation leaked, sending shockwaves through the political world. Analysts speculated on the extent of her alleged corruption, comparing her downfall to other infamous political scandals. Some predicted that if the accusations were proven true, Henyard could face serious jail time. The city council, which had once supported her, acted swiftly. One trustee declared, "We can no longer stand by while taxpayer money is squandered. We are calling for an immediate investigation." The administration had failed the city, and officials who had once stood by her side now turned their backs. A special emergency session was called, broadcast live to the public, where calls for a forensic investigation and, if necessary, her removal from office were made loud and clear. It was a breathtaking moment. The woman who had once been one of the most powerful figures in the city was now being publicly deserted. The people had already made up their minds. Tiffany Henyard had lost their trust. But Henyard wasn't ready to go down without a fight. In a desperate attempt to salvage her public image, her team rushed to control the damage. A carefully scripted video statement was released, filled with her usual talking points, deflecting blame, rallying support, and accusing her opponents of orchestrating a political witch hunt. But the public response was swift and brutal. Protesters erupted outside City Hall, chanting and holding signs demanding justice. Some called for her immediate arrest, while others demanded she step down. Tiffany's carefully cultivated image as an untouchable leader was crumbling before her eyes. Despite her best efforts to spin the narrative, the truth was gaining ground. Her supporters dwindled by the day, and even the media, once her ally, began to turn against her. The walls were closing in, and it was clear that Tiffany Henyard's time at the helm was quickly coming to an end. She remained defiant in her public statements, vehemently denying the mounting allegations against her. "I've devoted my life to serving the city. The truth will come out, and I will not be intimidated," she declared, her voice firm. But the internet had little patience for her. Denials. Social media exploded with backlash, accusing her of being a thief and a liar. One post read, "Now you want to talk after all the money you've stolen? Where's the fake news when we have documents, recordings, and witnesses? You're done. Just resign." Instead of backing down, Tiffany called a press conference to address the allegations head-on. In fiery, defiant tones, she accused the media, her political rivals, and even the federal government of targeting her. "They want to silence me because I refuse to play by their rules," she said, growing more impassioned with each word. But the reporters were relentless, asking questions about the leaked bank records, the tapes of her threatening opponents, and the whistleblower speaking out against her. Henyard skillfully avoided answering any of their questions, doubling down on her accusations of being persecuted. But by that point, the story had already shifted against her. Late that evening, after most news outlets had finished their coverage, the unthinkable happened. The FBI, with support from state officials, executed a search warrant at Henyard's residence and workplace. This was a historic moment. The first time in the city's history that federal investigators had ever searched the home of a sitting mayor. Journalists swarmed the scene as agents removed laptops, hard drives, and boxes of documents from the property. Then came the image that would come to symbolize her dramatic fall from grace. Tiffany Henyard in handcuffs. Within minutes, the image went viral. What had started as an investigation and a series of accusations had now evolved into a full-blown criminal case. The charges were serious: wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit bribery, all carrying severe prison sentences. Legal experts on news channels discussed the gravity of the charges, with one analyst noting that a convicted Henyard could face over 20 years in prison. The possibility of a plea agreement now seemed her only option. The city held its breath. Political allies who had once praised Henyard now distanced themselves, issuing statements calling for justice and accountability. Investigators revealed that other officials close to Tiffany were also under investigation. The city was in chaos. Some celebrated her fall, others were in shock, while still others had seen it coming from a mile away. Tiffany, however, sat alone in a holding cell, staring at the cold gray walls. The empire she had built was crumbling around her. It was clear that the city was preparing for a new leader, but Tiffany's story was far from over. Through her lawyers, she sent one final message from behind bars. This is not the truth. The truth will be revealed. Whether this was a final act of rebellion or an empty threat remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: Tiffany Henyard's reign was coming to an end. Her rise from a powerful political figure to a disgraced criminal would be a tale for the history books, a story of corruption, deceit, and the abuse of power taken to new heights. The burning question remained: did she truly deserve this downfall? Or was there another side to the story the public hadn't yet seen? Could Tiffany Henyard somehow stage a dramatic comeback? Or was this the final nail in her political coffin? After all, if the scandal was unfolding in the open, just imagine what was happening behind closed doors that we haven't even heard about yet. The public's fascination with her downfall continued to grow, and one thing was certain: this story was far from over. Tiffany's fate seemed sealed, but as history has shown, even the most disgraced politicians always find a way back. For now, the world would wait and watch, knowing that Tiffany Henyard's saga was far from finished.